So I'll start and just add into the chat as you come in. My name is Lola Elfman. I am the CEO and founder of Develop Well. We are a coaching and consulting firm that works. I'm in the DC area on Piscataway land. I use the she and her pronouns. But we have a team of people that are around the country, and we work with some really great organizations, such as some of these folks, on things like leadership development and coaching and HR. And I like to nerd out on things like performance reviews and goal setting. And I love talking about management, which is what we are here for tonight. Mary, thank you very much. Mary put into the chat a link to a Google Doc for a handout. It's also in our session overview page on the Netroots site. So if that's where you found this workshop, you can now find the link to this worksheet there, and we'll be using this and going through it tonight. So as we're starting, one of the things I like to think about with management is asking some of these questions, because this is what I hear from people a lot as I'm coaching with folks. I hear things like, it's just faster if I do it myself, or I thought I was clear, I thought they understood, or I just don't have time for this, right? This being all sorts of things, walking people through things, giving the clear feedback. It's, and sometimes it's just like, I've got to do it myself. And then we were in a workshop yesterday, and someone said the most amazing thing, which was, I only delegate the things I don't like to do, which I thought was a really honest admission. And so I added it to my list. I was like, ooh, I'm adding this here. So you don't have to say in the chat if this is something that you have thought yourself, but we just want to be real talk that this is sometimes what managers hear. And so we're going to talk about why that is, what we can do to combat that, how we can support ourselves and our teams. So if you think about your day, when you are not a manager, right? You're delivering on your own work, you're doing your own projects, you get to set your schedule, you have due dates and deliverables, all these important things, but really it's like you're setting your work. And then here you have things like, oh my gosh, manager, all of a sudden the pie chart of your time expands significantly, and you have all of these other things to do, except that you are working the same supposedly number of hours. So how do you balance all of these things that you need to do as a manager and delivering on your own work? I don't know if any of you in the chat have felt that yourself. Definitely give a little +1. Also, as you're joining, would love, again, just your name, where you're from, say hello, so we have a sense of who is here tonight. But really, what we'll say here, let me pare it down for you, is that these are the core pieces of what management is about. It's about growing your people. Essentially, what we want as a manager is to support the individual people who are on our team, help them succeed. We do want to help them do great work, right? Many of you are working on campaigns or in issue organizing, and you're doing some really important work, right? You're also helping grow people in doing that, and you're leading your team to achieving greater results. These are the core elements of what you're doing. So I also just want to pause and say, as we've been understanding what our role is as leaders, is really also understanding what goes into organizations and really making sure that we're looking at all areas of our management, that it's not just, I'll tell you, sometimes a management training is not a Band-Aid fix, right, onto all of those things. And so what we do at Develop Well, and what we're going to help you do a little bit through this training tonight, is to see how some of the individual things that you are doing in your personal leadership are all connected to the interpersonal relationships that you have, that your management is part of developing those interpersonal relationships. Communication, feedback, leadership is all part of developing those interpersonal relationships. And that feeds into the culture of your organization and your team, right? It's connected to the bigger vision and values of your organization, but it's also connected to your small team, to the culture that people have, how they feel safe bringing up issues, if they feel like they are able to raise flags, if they're able to innovate and learn, right? That's all part of the culture of an organization that is fostered through interpersonal dynamics and individual actions. And of course, the fundamental piece is what's at the institutional and systematic level, right? What are the goals? What are the policies? What are the systems? How are decisions made? And so this is adapted from the 4 I's of oppression, which is really important to understanding that nothing can be fixed in any one segment of these. They all have to be connected. And our personal identities are a part of this. I bring this up now because with management, we have to be aware of our own identity and the impact that we have in those relationships, right? So there's a lot more learning to do there, but we'll come back throughout tonight in talking about how what we're doing is really touching on all 4 of these elements here. So before we get into things, because I want to be talking a little bit about what's the difference between management and leadership. And sometimes those words are used really interchangeably, and there is some overlap, but really we're talking about some specific things. So one of my favorite writers and speakers is Simon Sinek, and he has a great book called Leaders Eat Last. That's what I do when I switch things. Leaders Eat Last. And so this is just a couple of minutes of him talking, and hopefully you can hear me on here. So I'm going to turn it up, and we'll just let Simon Sinek talk for a minute.
There are 2 things that I think that great leaders need to have: empathy and perspective. And I think these things are very often forgotten. Leaders are so often so concerned about their status or their position in an organization, they actually forget their real job. And the real job of a leader is not about being in charge, it's about taking care of those in our charge. And I don't think people realize this, and I don't think people train for this. When we're junior, our only responsibility is to be good at our jobs. That's all we really have to do. And some people actually go get advanced educations so that they can be really good at their jobs, accountants or whatever, right? And you show up and you work hard, and the company will give us tons and tons of training how to do our jobs. They'll show us how to use the software. They'll send us away for a few days to get trained in whatever it is that we're doing for the company. And then they expect us to go be good at our jobs. And that's what we do. We work very hard. And if you're good at your job, they'll promote you. And at some point, you'll get promoted to a position where we're now responsible for the people who do the job we used to do, but nobody shows us how to do that. And that's why we get managers and not leaders. Because the reason our managers are micromanaging us is because they actually do know how to do the job better than us. That's what got them promoted. Really what we have to do is go through a transition. Some people make it quickly, some people make it slowly, and unfortunately some people will never make that transition at all. Which is we have to go through this transition of being responsible for the job and then turning into somebody who's now responsible for the people who are responsible for the job. And as I said before, one of the great things that is lacking in most of our companies is that they are not teaching us how to lead. And leadership is a skill like any other. It is a practicable, learnable skill. And it is something that you work on. It's like a muscle. If you practice it all the days, you will get good at it and you will become a strong leader. If you stop practicing, you will become a weak leader. Like parenting, everyone has the capacity to be a parent. Doesn't mean everybody wants to be a parent, and doesn't mean everybody should be a parent. Leadership is the same. We all have the capacity to be a leader. Doesn't mean everybody should be a leader, and it doesn't mean everybody wants to be a leader. And the reason is because it comes at great personal sacrifice. Remember, you're not in charge, you're responsible for those in your charge. That means things like when everything goes right, you have to give away all the credit. And when everything goes wrong, you have to take all the responsibility. That sucks, right? It's things like staying late to show somebody what to do. It's things like when something does actually break, when something goes wrong, instead of yelling and screaming and taking over, you say, try again. When the overwhelming pressures are not on them, the overwhelming pressures are on us. At the end of the day, great leaders are not responsible for the job. They're responsible for the people who are responsible for the job. They're not even responsible for the results. I love talking to CEOs and say, what's your priority? And they put their hands on their hips all proud and they say, my priority is my customer. I'm like, really? You haven't talked to a customer in 15 years. There's no CEO on the planet responsible for the customer. They're just not. They're responsible for the people who are responsible for the people who are responsible for the customer.
All right. So that is Simon Sinek. If you've not read his books or checked out some of his TED Talks, I highly recommend. Really some great stuff. And one of the things that stuck out to me and continuously does when I listen to his talks is just this refrain, that you are not in charge, that you are responsible for those in your charge. And I think that that's really an important piece for us who are organizers, who are working in the progressive movement, to understand what our role is in supporting people in the work that they're doing to achieve the large goals that we're going to, right? And this is also a point for us to think about that someone else has helped us in our own lives and in our own careers and trajectory to get to where we are. And so we just pause for a moment now and think about who was someone who encouraged us, who gave us a nudge, who dropped us an email one day saying, hey, I saw this opportunity, I thought of you, or reviewed our resumes, or a letter. Who are some of those people? What did they do for us that maybe we don't even recognize all the time? And who are we to someone else like that, right? That is an opportunity for us. So what will make leadership rewarding for you is investing in the leadership of others and bringing others along with you. And so I really want to invite you to be thinking about how to do that. Because, and this is went too fast. Because this is sort of the premise of this talk tonight, which is leading the people and managing the work, right? There is real work to be done. Project management is a really important skill. Having that Asana checklist or your spreadsheet or your whiteboard, whatever it is really important. But also that you are leading people, human beings, individuals with full lives. And that's a lot of work too. And that's an important role. So throughout all of this, we're going to be talking about what it looks like to build trust and respect, what it looks like to be believing in the dignity and worth of everyone on your team, supporting people through obstacles that are inevitable and uncertainty, which is inevitable, as we know through the last 2 years of life, and helping people not only succeed and hit the goals, but to help them thrive. And that has been a really key piece. And in this, of course, is what you need to do for yourself to make sure that you are not overextending yourself as a leader and as a manager, that you are setting healthy boundaries, you're modeling healthy boundaries, and that everyone can succeed. You too. It's not self-sacrifice. Okay, I really want to make sure that that's clear. So one of these things that we like to bring in and develop well to our trainings and to our coaching and leadership is this cycle, because it's really helpful. Just one, bringing awareness to ourselves. Where are we? What's happening? What's the issue here? And before jumping to action, right? So many of us are campaigners. We're like, okay, what are we going to jump to? Is just stepping back and doing a little bit of analysis, a little bit of assessment of what's actually needed here, right? What actually is the intervention or the tool that is required? And then we can take action. We can do that thing. And then we can assess again. Did that work? Okay, it did. What worked about it? What didn't? What will we do next time? What will we change? And you are likely doing this in other areas of your work, but here's one place to do this with your management and the work of other people. So what we're going to start with here, and if you can click on the link that Mary dropped in, there's a worksheet. You are welcome to follow along and do this now, but also to do this later, but I'm going to talk you through it now. Because what this looks like is here are some core leadership skills for managers, right? Different people are going to have different versions. This is one that we use because we think it encompasses most of the things that managers do. And it's an assessment wheel. I love making these little pies. They're really fun. I make a wheel or a pie for everything. But each slice is, how are you setting goals and expectations? How are you delegating and project managing? How are you giving feedback? How are you helping to grow people on your team? How are you helping to establish and build and maintain the culture of your team? And a core part of that also is communication and collaboration. What are you doing around communication and collaboration? How effective are you being at that? There's also looking at relationships and how you're building relationships with the people around you, not just with the people that you manage, but the people who are your peers, your partners, and internally, externally. There's also a really very real fact of there's some team and organizational admin, some operations that needs to happen, right? There's the business of running a team. So there's this element. And then there's, of course, thinking about how equitable and inclusive are your practices, your own journey in being equitable and inclusive in this work, as well as the team's culture, right? So in this, what I like to ask people to do is to think about where they are on this wheel, right? So there's little numbers on that. So, okay, right now I'm setting goals and expectations, I'm a 6. I'm pretty good, but I could be better, right? And going around each piece. And you'll notice as you make this wheel, some things may be better than others, right? And so if this wheel will turn, it'll go kadunk, which is okay, but it's bringing some awareness to this. Another way that I like to give this for people is just a simple table, which again is in that worksheet that you click on. The worksheet is also available in the Netroots page for this session. You can download it there. It's a Google Doc. Make a copy for yourself, edit away. But I like to ask people here, what is your current level of ability, right? Where are you right now? What's a true, honest assessment, okay? And then what is your desired level of ability, right? What does growth look like for you? And this is really important. You can say in this areas where I rate myself, what's working well here? What am I doing in that slice that's really working for myself, for other areas, for other people? And in the areas that are lower, that's an opportunity for to say, okay, what's hard and challenging here? Maybe is this something that I just don't like to do very much? Is it something that doesn't come naturally? Do I just not have a lot of support? What's there? Identify that. I also want to name that sometimes when you look at this, there may be areas of your management and leadership that are doing okay and maybe are in maintenance mode. They may not need attention right now, and that's okay. Because doing all of these things, trying to improve in all of these areas, all at the same time, is really challenging. So I want to pause and say, you don't have to do this all at the same time. Pick one. And sometimes they will feed off of each other, okay? So sometimes your ability to delegate and project manage is actually going to be improved when you are getting clearer about your goals and expectations, or when you're getting clearer about feedback and giving feedback, right? Maybe your team culture will improve when you actually look at some of the ways that you communicate and collaborate. So these are some ideas. We're going to get into some examples for that a little bit further down tonight. Okay. And of course, I like to move to action, right? That was in our little cycle there. So for yourself right now, think to yourself, what is one action I can take to shift my management? If you want to drop it in the chat, I would love to see that. Also, throughout this webinar tonight, if you have questions, please do feel free to jump in with questions, and we'll pause throughout. We will have time at the end. Love to see any of those. Yeah, so let's get moving. Okay, so effective team leadership. Like I said, there's all of these things to try and do in leading a team and managing people. It's a lot. So let's break down what a couple of them look like. So here's an activity that I really, really like. Another author and writer, speaker whom I really like is called, his name is Adam Grant. He just wrote a book called Think Again. He actually co-wrote Sheryl Sandberg's book, Option B. And he is a social psychologist that thinks a lot about how teams work and how leaders work. And he put together this thing called user manuals. And it's a really great idea. It's sort of like the one-pager, the cliff notes of how you operate. How do you work? And you give it to someone and say, here's the instruction manual on me and what works for me. And it's really awesome. Our team loves it. But what it helps to do is it helps to build trust. It helps to establish some shared understanding and practices. And also some psychological safety for people of saying, okay, here's how I communicate best. Here's how I don't communicate. Here's what happens if I feel threatened, right? Just some ideas there. What's great about this is that it can be done in one-on-ones or in a group, right? And I've done it both ways, and people love this. If you're looking for a team retreat activity, this is a great one right here. And what's great about it too is that you can repeat it as people grow, as people change, as campaign needs change, as you evolve, right? It really does help. Mark, I see your note there. Recruiting team members and building your team is definitely part of one of those things. I would put it within the like managing the business of your team, but I may add it out. Some people are in charge of recruitment and some are not. So I would say like add your wheel as like if there are other things within your wheel that are part of your responsibilities, add your wheel, add your slice there. So we're going to go through some of this user manual. I'm going to talk through it. If you feel like doing it along with us right now, by all means, go for it. So in the user manual, what it asks you to do is to think about, start by journaling. I love pen and paper for this. So you just set a timer on your phone for 10 minutes, 8 minutes. It'll go by really fast, but just some things to consider about yourself, not about other people. You're starting with you, okay? You're starting with yourself. Just even starting with things like, I am motivated. Here's what I'm really motivated, what excites me. I'm happy when work is going this way. I'm happy when people are acting like this. They're communicating well. Things are going well. And thinking things like, I value these qualities in people that I work with. I really value when people are transparent about what they're doing. I value when they respect my boundaries, all of these things, right? A great question to ask yourself is, when might people misunderstand you? So people might misunderstand me when, or they might misinterpret this thing about me. I think identifying that for yourself can be really helpful in figuring out a way to share with other people. Also saying, here's some scenarios, some actions, some behaviors, some situations that I may find challenging. And I think by saying this, we're bringing awareness to that situation so that we can assess what's the right intervention, what can I ask for, what can I do, there's sensing a theme here, in the situation. And getting to some action steps like, okay, when I'm challenged, how do I get unstuck, right? When I feel overwhelmed, how do I balance myself, right? And asking things like, what's the best way someone can bring a question or an idea to me? Sometimes people take this question to the next level and say, what are communication ways like email or Slack or picking up the old telephone and giving me a call? How do I want people to communicate with me in these different ways? How will we as a team do this? We'll get that in a second. So you get the idea here. And then what I like to do is put them in these quadrants. Okay, what are my values? What motivates me? What is one sentence about my values and motivation that I want to share with people? What do people need to know? And what about problem solving and navigating change? What is one sentence about me and how I problem solve and how I navigate changes, how I work through conflict that I want people to understand? Same with communication style and preferences. So I will check Slack all night long, probably shouldn't, but I'm not going to reply to emails after I leave for work for the day because I'm with my kids and I'm doing bedtime and things like that, right? That's just what people need to know about my life right now, okay? Other times I've done it, but not right now. Same thing with what's one line about collaboration and working with others. Okay, so you spend some time on that. This is just for you, okay? This is just your user manual. So after you get this, think about, what would it be like if I take this and I give it to people who I work with and I talk it through with them and answer some questions? Probably there would be a lot of information shared. And even people who you've worked with for quite some time are going to be like, wow, I had no idea, or this really tracks. I feel like I understand you so much more. That's awesome. And so what does it look like now if we do this for everyone on your team? Okay. And one of the things I want to bring in here is understanding all of the people on your team and what you're doing with them and how you can put all of these things together. So what I encourage people to do is to do these user manuals with everyone and then share them out with each other. But you as a manager should take a beat to think about who are the people on my team and how well do I understand each of them. So doing the user manual may be one way to do it, but I want you to also do another check-in. This is going to go back to that wheel that we were doing. How well am I checking in and giving feedback and coaching people? So one of the things here is, I always like to ask, and we'll get into this and a lot more in a second, is about one-on-ones and check-ins. How consistently am I holding those one-on-ones and check-ins? Real talk, you gotta keep those one-on-ones, okay? But what does our communication look like? How well do I understand their values and motivation? How well do I understand their growth, their growth areas and their strengths? And what's an action step that I'm going to take? Again, we're bringing awareness of your knowledge about each person on your team. You're assessing your knowledge about them and then assessing what's the action that I need to take here. So here's an example that this might look like. I did this as a sample with some of the coaches who I work with. And I said, all right, I'm like 1 out of 10, or 1 out of 5, like 5 and 5, keep my check-ins, okay. But on communication here, I don't really know how Sonali likes feedback. So on my next step, I need to set up some communication norms together in our one-on-one. So we have some ways to do that. So you get the idea here. It gives me a way to go through each person on my team, say, how well do I understand them and what's an appropriate minor tweak maybe, right? Not necessarily a big change, but something I can do for my team. I'm gonna pause here and see if there's any questions on the user manual, on assessing and bringing this to every person on your team, anything like that. Feel free to type in questions throughout this training. Happy to answer and jump in at any point. Okay. So the next thing that really helps, it's like this natural progression for people, is like, oh, okay, once we do this activity together, maybe let's put all of these in one place. I love having what I call like a home base for my team, right? Even if there's a larger organization, it's my team within a team. I like to say, okay, what's my team name? Who are we? What's our team purpose? What are we here to do? What campaign are we running? What's our purpose within the organization? And then list people and say, what's our roles and responsibilities? I like to do this because sometimes they change. I run a consulting business. Our clients and projects change on a pretty regular basis. So it's great to know, oh, right, Lola's working on this, Holly's working on this, we go from there. Then I like to have some of the basic team agreements about how we're all working together. Sometimes this comes from us doing the user manual activity and we realize, oh, the timing of our meetings, actually, we need to push them back in the day or have them on certain days or times, or have video off calls and certain calls video on. Those kinds of agreements come from really understanding each person on our team. It helps us work better, right? And right now, when we are not in the same place as much as we were before, but even when we are, it helps us optimize that time together, okay? I also like to just say, here's how we use email. Here's how we use team calls, one-on-ones, Slack, Google Hangout, Courier Pigeon, whatever you use, name it, write it. Make the implicit explicit. Write it down. It's really helpful. And for those of you who are recruiting and building out your teams, this will help you with onboarding. It will help people who are new to your team understand the systems of your team and the culture of your team. Remember that wheel, right? We're looking at the systems and the culture. They reinforce each other here. So by all means, in the worksheet that I handed out, that's in the chat here, but also on the page for this session, take this, edit it, and make it your own. Have fun with it. But I know that people who we work with really like this one. All right. So we've talked a little bit now about how we understand the different people on our teams, right? How we understand what motivates them, our own way that we work and offering that. So let's get into some specifics of how we actually manage individuals. So one of the key things here are one-on-ones. And I already prefaced this by like, you gotta keep your one-on-ones. But before I go into that, because I don't want to just lecture you on that, I want to just help you take a moment to think about what are some of the reasons, real talk, right? What are some of the reasons that you may find yourself avoiding, canceling, moving, dreading one-on-ones? Maybe also which one-on-ones do you look forward to and have fun with, right? Think about that too. I don't want to just be in the negative zone. But the reality is that we move these. They're oftentimes the things that seem like, oh, when something is busy with a client or a partner or an event, this is the thing that can move. They'll understand. But actually, this is some of your most important time, right, in terms of your overall success, so that you can check in with the people doing the work. Okay. I also want you to bring some awareness to, if you find yourself avoiding or canceling or moving something, acknowledge it and understand why you might be avoiding it. Is there a dynamic involved between you and that person? Is there a challenge or something that you're not sure how to address, right? It's also a place where bias can really sneak in, and I want you to be aware of that. So when we're looking at how are we equitably managing everyone on our team, we want to be thinking about how often are we doing all of those things on the wheel as consistently as possible with everyone on our team. And the one-on-one is one of those key core places that if that slips, a lot of other things are going to flow in terms of how we give feedback, how we help people grow, how we find opportunities for people to do new projects. We want to be aware of that. The one-on-ones is actually one of those places. We also don't want anyone operating in fear with their manager or with people on their team. And a one-on-one is a place to build relationships, okay? Again, we're helping people to connect, to communicate, and to build trust. All right, so I just want to name these things that they're really, really important, okay? Got that. Consistency here. So the workbook, we also put in this template for a one-on-one doc. And I think that this is really helpful. Again, edit it to your heart's content. It has some elements that we know that people have really liked, and tweak it. I think on our team alone, everyone has taken this and modeled it in a different way. And that's what's kind of cool. It doesn't have to be all the same, right? I like to say that there's no cookie cutters, but there are snowflakes, right? Everyone is a little bit different, but we're all kind of made up of the same thing. Some of the core components of what makes one-on-one successful is that they are consistent. Even if you say they're going to be every other week, that's okay, but you have to consistently be doing them every other week and finding a good, reliable time. What I found when I was canceling one-on-ones was sometimes it meant that it was at a bad time. I didn't have time to prepare. It was jammed between other meetings. I was trying to leave. So I moved them, and it kind of changed the game of it. You get to do things like that. Two-way feedback. I think, and I've had a variety of different kinds of one-on-one relationships where sometimes it felt like I was doing all the talking or the other person was doing all the talking. And so this is something for you to think about. Is this a two-way exchange? How can we? So we have a couple things in here that I think will help you do that. Self-reflection or learnings are a really good way to do that. Here's one thing that went really great this week. Here's something I'm going to take away from this week, right? Here's some feedback from the manager. One thing I noticed about your work this week. Something else I think you can do. That's really helpful in creating that shared participation. This is also a chance for you as a manager. You probably have your team meetings and some other ways to communicate, but for you as a manager to impart important information that this person needs in order to do their job, right? So this is also a way for you to lead transparently and share information that they need, okay? It seems sort of basic, but sometimes it's funny how we don't always use that time. It's also really helpful for clarifying priorities, right? Here's where I'm at with this work. Here's what's on track. Here's what's not. How can I move something, all right? I think that can be in a really helpful way, especially not in front of the rest of the team. If someone is, wants to shift some things or isn't sure how to talk about it in front of the team, it's a good way in a one-on-one place to do that. Okay. You'll also notice on here, you might see those little rainbow colors where it says, I am below, at, or over capacity. And our team loves this. Every week, someone says, here's where I'm at. Sometimes people have like, I'm an at/up, right? But really saying, here's where I'm at with my capacity. I'm good. Everything's good. Or I'm a little over. So like if I could take something off, if there's something that I could do and next week or push off, that has been really helpful, even below capacity, so we can shift things around. I highly encourage that one. Very curious in the chat if there's anything that you have found helpful in your one-on-ones or things that are on here that you are sparking some ideas for you. Anything in the chat? Would love questions on this, thoughts, ideas. Any reasons where you push off your one-on-ones or ways that you'd love to get some more involvement in your one-on-ones? Yeah, Shayna, the at below over capacity is really helpful. I highly recommend bringing that in. I can't tell you. All right. Well, if there's other questions or thoughts on this, awesome. We'll keep going into this. Okay. So what we're going to get into now is one area other area that I think is really important for managers and leading teams, which is delegation and setting expectations. So you've got your one-on-ones, you have a time and a place to talk about everything. So let's talk about what it looks like to actually delegate. And it's been amazing how with some managers, this is actually one of the hardest things. So yeah. Ursula, is the at capacity, is this like per task, project, or more? So on our team, we use the at, below, over for like the scope of their week overall. So we'll say, with all of the project work that you have on your plate this week, are you at capacity, right? But sometimes someone could do that per project. I think you can really adapt it how you want to be. It works for our team when it's sort of an overall, right? Here's where we're at. Sometimes what we do is do it actually 2 weeks out. So we'll take this week and look at next week and say, here's my project plan for next week. I'm going to be at capacity, right? So yeah, it's really fun. All right. So delegation, this will probably help with some of that capacity, right? So we put together this very simple framework that when you're delegating, you're saying it. I know it's a little silly, but it helps everybody remember. So in delegation, we're going to walk through what these all look like, but it's the, how do we say what we want? We want to set clear expectations first and foremost, and we'll go through what that looks like in just a second. But after we set those expectations, we need to ask what people need to be successful, and be really clear about that. And we'll go through what it looks like to ask those questions in a moment. And then the why is you will check in on this, right? There's always a moment of how are we going to know when we come into all of the answers. Where are we in progress? Okay, we'll check on that. So here's a couple things. We're going to go through a couple of ways to look at setting expectations. So very broadly, and I would love in the chat as we go through here, if there's anything that you think you're trying to delegate some expectation you're trying to set that maybe isn't so clear. I know the chat is a little bit slow, so I'll sort of go slowly and look for it. But if there's something you're trying to delegate and think through, feel free to drop it in. We'll sort of workshop it in real time. But so here's something that someone may have said very broadly. Can you help plan our upcoming virtual rally? Can you help plan this thing? It's very broad, right? It's very not specific. What are the things we need? We need a little bit more detail in here, okay? We need the who, what, where, when, why. And in here, here's another way that we might be able to delegate, right? Say, can you draft a plan for our upcoming virtual rally by Friday? I'll review it by the end of the week so we can get started on arranging the logistics on Monday. So here there's a little bit more scope. It's not the entire virtual rally. It's the draft of the plan that we'll look over together, and then we'll start on the logistics, okay? It's one piece of it. That's a lot more helpful for someone to understand what their scope is and do. Okay, let's look at another example. This may be familiar to some of you. Please write up a press release on this. A press release on what? When is it due? What does it need to encompass? Who is going to look at it? I've never written a press release before. All sorts of things that people may ask. Okay, so here's another way that someone might delegate a press release, which is, please get a final draft of a press release to me by the end of the day tomorrow. You can look at the one Tanya drafted last month for reference and ask Sam to do a first round of edits. So here in this framework, in this example of delegation, what I like to point out is that this is also a growth opportunity potentially. Maybe someone has not done many press releases, but you want to get them to a place where they are. Giving someone a sample of a press release, an example of a good press release, right? They can look at. They can also have someone else. You can multi-delegate here. You can have someone else support this person in doing a draft, walking them through it before it gets to you. I think sometimes that's a hard part of is delegating meaning that I have to oversee all of the work? And that isn't always the case, right? You may say, I'm going to see this at the very end of the process, but here's some other people who can help you along the way. So if you have any other ideas of how you want to set expectations clearly up front, feel free to drop them in the chat. We're going to move on to the A part, which is ask what they need to be successful. So in this part, there is a beat. Hopefully the person, as you are practicing delegation, is getting better at this back and forth of asking you questions. But I want you, as the manager, as someone doing the delegating, to get in the habit of pausing, asking some questions. And the really key thing here is to not ask yes or no questions. So instead of asking, do you have capacity to take this on? Yeah, I totally do. I'm good. And actually, maybe they don't. Asking, what is your capacity to take this on? Okay. What is on your plate? What is on your schedule? Okay. Then you could ask a even deeper clarifying question. What would need to shift in your priorities or other projects to make this possible? Or how can I help you shift your priorities and projects to make this possible? That is a more specific question of asking someone what they need. If you are asking them to just say yes or no, chances are in the power dynamic between you and them, they're just going to say yes. But even if they need help, they're not going to know how to ask it. Same with saying, what resources or support do you need? It's the other thing we hear a lot is someone saying, do you need anything? Do you got it? Someone's gonna be like, oh yeah, I got it. So what resources or support? Maybe you can even get that deeper and say, do you need, oh, I even did it myself there. Would you like someone to help you edit this? So-and-so has done this. They may say yes or no. I know, even me, it's really hard to get out of the yes and no, but I really encourage you to try, okay? Or asking just what questions do you have? Now, the last part of delegating here is to say when you're going to check in on it. So you will check in next. This is the why of it. Set a date and time. If you are having your regular one-on-ones and it happens to fall in that nice cadence for you, use it then. Maybe you have a meeting or a call. Maybe you clarify and say, just send me a draft via email or drop it in Slack, right? A lot of folks when delegating are worried about micromanaging, right? Like, I don't want to micromanage, but how do I not? This is one of the key steps that helps you not micromanage. And the reason is that it lets everyone know when they can expect to see an update or a draft, right? Date and time is really helpful here. Get as specific as possible. It also lets the person know how and when to ask for help because you've already established that. So maybe part of that ask what they need is they'll say, I'm going to do a rough draft based on this previous example. I'll really need you to look at it in this way. I've gotten in the habit when we have a little project management system, when someone passes the baton to me for it's my turn to look at something, I ask them to write me a sentence about what they need me to look at. So if it's a proposal for a client, am I looking at this just for typos and overall layout because I'm a stickler for that stuff? Or am I reading this for substance of the project we're doing and the scope and the detail of the timeline? What am I actually looking at? So they redelegate to me. And that is a really empowering thing for someone to do. It's also putting some of that ownership back in their lap. So I'll pause here. I'm going to pause on this slide here that's sort of the framework and ask in the chat if you have any questions or thoughts, some roadblocks that you've had in delegation that maybe you want to talk through a little bit. Or I know it's hard to talk in this. I'm waiting on a delay for your chats, but I would love to hear if there's anything about delegating, setting expectations, setting goals with people that maybe is challenging, that you've had, maybe things that you've had success in, things that work for you. I'll just pause here for a second. I'll take a sip of my water while I wait for that to load up. Yeah, one of the things that I think is really helpful in this is to say, please draft, create this. Here are the details that I like. Here's something that you can include, or saying, here's the percentage complete that I'd like it. That's been really helpful for some folks in our team, saying like, I just need a rough draft. Spend 30 minutes on getting it as messy as possible, and then we'll come in together on a call and look at it. But other times I will say, I need you to get this PowerPoint, this presentation as close as possible to being done so that I can just go in for the final edits. That level of clarity is really, really helpful for folks. Okay, I don't see any more chats coming in on this. Doesn't mean you can't ask. We're going to move on to the feedback part of this now. But if you have questions about the setting goals and delegating, by all means, let me know. Okay, so feedback is a natural part of the cycle here. This is the thing that managers, it is literally the top most requested thing that we get training requests for. How do I give feedback? How do I give constructive feedback? How do I give direct feedback? All of these things. So we'll spend a little bit of time here because it's important. We talk about there being 3 different ways of feedback, or 3 different ways for you to ace your feedback. Yes, another tongue-in-cheek little acronym, but it works. The first part is the A, is that part of feedback is acknowledging and appreciating people's effort. So I didn't do my quiz in here, but I will say, what I like to ask people is it 3-to-1, the ratio of positive feedback that people need to hear to constructive feedback, 5-to-1, or 8-to-1? Well, if you're guessing that it's 5-to-1, that's right. People need to hear about 5 times as much affirmative, appreciative feedback as they need to hear constructive feedback. Now, this does not mean everyone is getting a gold star every day and a trophy for everything. But what it is saying is that we need to practice a lot more acknowledging the work that people are doing, the effort that they're taking, the growth they have made, in order to reinforce the work they should continue to do. That's how people grow. That's also motivating. And it's on that wheel of management that I showed you at the beginning. So there comes some really important places. I mean, there comes some easy places where you can be doing this literally every day and in your one-on-ones. I'm going to go back to that right there. The second place is to coach or clarify what people need in order to achieve their goals. So as we went through the delegation and the say model, right, we asked what people needed and we said we would check in at a certain point. Coaching and clarifying goals can be really helpful to make sure that they're not getting too far off track and they can come back. That's where coaching comes in. And that is a key part of feedback. Help someone understand what they need before it gets too late. Okay. But then the E of acing feedback, the evaluation, is really key, because there is a time when you need to evaluate someone's high level progress, but also say, here was the goal, here was the progress and the achievement of that goal, how are we measuring it, and assess it. Okay, so we want to evaluate that. That is a real part of feedback, but it's also couched with giving coaching or clarifying feedback or acknowledging and appreciation feedback. Okay. So because I think that acknowledging and appreciation is one of those things that's actually one of the hardest ways that people have to give feedback, we're going to spend a beat on this here. So this is, sometimes we hear these things. Great job. You know, Jane wrote a great email, or you're really nice, or that project last year was really good. So there's a couple things here that's wrong with these. So one is they're all very, very general. They're not specific about the work, about the quality of the work, about what was done, about what that person achieved. It's very general in some things. You're not even sure who it's about. And the last one, it's about something that was done last year. It's not current and present and timely. So we want to be thinking about all of these things directly. So here's a couple of ways that you might rewrite these or say you wrote a really strong proposal that outlines and samples really impressed the client. Okay, that is really specific and helpful. Jane, the email you wrote was clear and had a strong call to action. Nice work. This is being given directly to the person, not about the person, which is really, really helpful. And then here it's saying, thank you for taking initiative to help the logistics team. It was much appreciated, as opposed to just saying, oh, you're really nice. This is acknowledging the qualities of a person and their actions, not just their personality traits. Okay. And here at the end, this project we just wrapped was a huge success. Here's how each team member contributed, or team contributed. So it's really timely. And this is what we call soft feedback. Soft does not mean that it's not good feedback or that it's not helpful, but it is specific. It's being offered directly to the person who wants to hear the feedback. And it's focused on actions, not personality traits. So it's a focus on what they did and how they did it, not who they are as a person. And it's timely as possible. So I'm going to go back to this one and just hang out here and say, any questions you have about feedback or ways to give feedback, affirmative feedback, that maybe you haven't thought of before. We're just going to pause a moment here and let the chat free up. Is there any kind of feedback that you've thought of that you need a little bit of support on how you give feedback to people? Here's our soft feedback again. Yeah. So as we're moving towards sort of the end of our core part here, we're going to, oh, I think I see something. Here, I'll go back. Okay, how do you give positive feedback when you actually really appreciate the work product but made a lot of edits? Oh, that is a great question. You know what, let me just go back a couple in here to our overall, our three kinds. So how do you give positive feedback when you actually really appreciate the work product but made a lot of edits? So this is a point where I think you get to really hone in on, again, the effort that someone put into it and the growth that was taken. You still get to point out what work and support you needed to give to get that person there, because that's a growth moment. That's a place to say, okay, this time we had to work together a lot. I gave a lot of edits. Next time, let's have you start with this as a template and try it a little bit more on your own and have my involvement be less, right? Even that is feedback. We're saying you have put in the effort, you were still learning. Next time, let's go here. Okay, the outcome was what we wanted. Let's make the way we get to the outcome be a little bit different. Someone can still feel really motivated by that kind of conversation that's also about their growth. It's not just you did this perfectly all the time, right? We don't want to wait until people are only doing things perfectly. So a positive conversation can also be a growth conversation. And I think that's what people mix up about feedback a lot. They think direct feedback or constructive feedback is always a negative, something didn't go well. It's actually constructive feedback can be about what went well too. So I hope that helps. Would love to hear, Isaac, in the chat if you have any thoughts or other ideas there. Other questions on feedback or ways to give feedback or challenges? You're welcome. So yeah, I think on the feedback piece, there is this idea that being direct is not being nice. And actually being direct and clear is one of the nicest things that you can do for people. You need to frame it and prepare for that conversation. But actually, as part of building trust and relationships, that can really go far when people feel like you have their best interest at heart. So here's a question. Will you touch on how to give feedback if someone is falling short on expectations or didn't do something that they were supposed to do? Absolutely. So this really comes back to why, I'll go back to here, why setting expectations super clearly and explicitly like this is so key. Because then you get to come back in that feedback and say, here was the expectation, here was our agreement, here's what we talked about, and here's where we are, here's where you are in meeting those expectations, and here's where the gap is. Okay. And then you can pause and say, what is your understanding of this? What is your approach to this, right? What do you think? And sometimes you will be surprised by people saying, being aware of that and saying, oh, right, this is the challenge I've had. Maybe they didn't know which question to ask at the beginning when you delegated, but now they have some questions. So it's a place to check in on. Corrective feedback is also really clear. So on that piece that you said, how do you give feedback on something someone didn't do or if they were supposed to do it? That's being really direct. The expectation was that you would do X, Y, and Z. I have not seen that. Can you tell me what's happening there? Right? That way you're also, again, sharing some of that ownership, right? I don't know, Ursula, this is so hard to not be able to just talk to you, but I'm curious if that's helpful, if there's anything else there. But I think it really comes back to what is that expectation that was set in that agreement? Where is the misalignment and what needs to happen next, right? So in a lot of what we say is this was the expectation. Here's what I missed. Here's what I expect next, and here's how we'll get there. Again, it's that whole, here's the awareness, analysis, and action. You're doing that over and over. Okay. Cool. So let's hop forward just a little bit. So as we're coming to a close of the main presentation point, I really want to be able to answer some more questions. So please do type in if you have questions about management, about leadership, about anything that we talked about here, and I will be happy to talk about it. But just for a moment to think to yourself how some of these things that you will do, some action steps. I will appreciate who on your team will you appreciate for doing, what are you going to appreciate them for doing, and when are you going to do that? Is it your one-on-one? Is it tomorrow is Friday? It's a great day to send someone a note and just be like, hey, I really want to say I really appreciate what you did. Maybe you need to offer someone some feedback, even helpful feedback. Hey, I just wanted to send a note about the draft you put together. It's really great. I have a couple of thoughts, right? Can we talk about it in our one-on-one next week? That's an okay way to tee up offering some feedback. Okay. And delegate. Hopefully you are delegating early and often and all the time. Hopefully you can. Hopefully you have people to delegate to. But make a plan for delegation. Delegation is always a time when you can help people grow in what they're doing and in their roles, right? You're giving someone an opportunity to learn. Oh, Ursula, that's great. Everything I'm saying is taking you back to when you had a really wonderful manager who did a lot of these things and helped me reach challenging goals. Yay. Oh, that's awesome. Hopefully it's about being intentional, right? Because again, these are some of the key things that you're trying to do. You are trying to do great work and achieve really important goals. Changing the country, right? Supporting our communities. This is really key. We're also growing people and supporting people and being able to stay in the movement in the long term and maintaining ourselves in the movement for the long term. That's a real thing. And leading our teams. There's a lot to do, a lot to keep track of. Mark, okay, question. Do you have any suggestions for encouraging team members to take more initiative or be more aggressive rather than waiting passively for guidance? Oh, that is a great question. So let me just back up a little bit here and see if I can find my team manual here. So one of the things I like about this team manual here is it gives you a sense to talk about the opportunity, like the time and places when people should be jumping into things. When are you going to be talking about campaigns? When are you going to be talking about when is the feedback going to be given, right? If people are waiting for you, that's a signal that maybe you need to build a time for people when there is shared guidance and support for each other, right? Maybe you have too many, some people may have too many, like the pings of the Slack, question, and actually you got to funnel all of those pings into one place. But maybe you're not being asked enough, so actually you need to find a time when people can ask you questions. I think that sometimes elevating those things and doing a little bit of the opposite can help spur a new idea and practice for people, and then say, okay, what's working here? I also just really like, and here I have a meeting inventory. I like having like an idea inventory or a communication inventory with people, just asking, what about what we are doing now works? What is not working? What do people need? Right? And putting a little bit of that ownership, it's starting here, Mark. Again, it's like putting that ownership on them and saying, okay, I'm really going to depend on you people to bring this up in this forum. Okay. And if it doesn't work, give it a little bit. It can't just be 1 week. It's got to be a little bit to come back to it. When we talk about initiative and people not taking initiative, sometimes there's something else in there that's sort of a roadblock of they're not sure how much ownership they can truly have, how much decision making they can really have, and maybe it's too broad, right? I'm not sure of your exact situation here, right? But sometimes giving some parameters for that ownership, saying, here's what I need you to do within these boundaries, right? That can actually be more helpful for people than something that's totally wide open, right? So we need to do this event, we need to plan this campaign. Here's a relative budget, here's relative size. If it's over this, that's going to be too much, but if it's under this, it's not there. That gives some people something to work with a little bit more. I sometimes ask people to do some research on like HR benefits or survey analysis, or like what people are doing team culture wise. And I will ask them, I'll say, do 30 minutes of research, because this is stuff we could do days. We could do a dissertation on it if we wanted to. Say, just do what's 30 minutes of research we'll find for you. And sometimes that helps people actually like find something. I'm not sure if that helps, Mark. I would love to know in the chat if you have other thoughts or clarification questions. Yeah, and Shayna, like you said, it's totally okay to affirm that it's okay to ask for help in between moments, or to say, right, this is what your user manual is really helpful with. Here's when and how it's okay to ask for help, or when you like to be asked, or you want to be open. Right? I have some rhythms of how I work and what I need to do when I'm doing like business budget stuff versus like putting together a training for this. It's hard for my brain to switch between those things, but I can proactively let my team know, hey, tomorrow morning I have a work block. If you have anything I need to look at that you need my feedback on and thought, I'm going to be able to look at it then. And that proactively lets my team know when I'm going to be available for things. So that's another practice that I think is really helpful for folks. Yeah, great questions. Shayna, is your question answered? Any other questions on delegation, on feedback? Hop down to. Just giving the chat a minute here for people to catch up if there's questions, if there's thoughts. What I will say while you are waiting and looking at this is that we actually have 2 workshops coming up. One is tomorrow, October 22nd, for those of you who are watching tonight. If you're watching after, I'm sorry. But we are doing a workshop tomorrow that is about coaching versus problem solving. So I'll talk a little bit about this while I'm waiting in the chat if people have some more questions for tonight. What we notice in a lot of the delegation feedback and supporting people is that folks think that they are coaching. They think that they are guiding people, that they're asking open-ended questions. But actually what's happened is because sometimes these folks were so skilled at doing that job themselves, they jump right into problem solving. And so what our workshop tomorrow is going to help people do is really how to step back so that you can properly coach and guide people to learn themselves, and do this by asking some open-ended questions and not just jumping into problem solving. Or if you are problem solving, how to do that as clearly as possible, because both are really key. It's not that one is better than the other. Sometimes someone just has a question and needs a problem solved. If you come in with like, well, what do you think about this? What is another option? Actually, they just need you to help solve the problem. And so helping people assess this, that's what we're going to cover tomorrow. And then on November 19th, we're going to be doing a workshop that's about giving direct feedback, a lot of what you've been asking here, and practicing some scenarios and a framework for how to frame direct feedback that is both kind and nice, but also is setting that expectation for people. Yeah. So yeah, Mark, I see I'm still learning, just working on local campaigns, but it can be challenging to be managing other folks at the same time when I'm still trying to learn what I need to do. It can be overwhelming. Absolutely. I totally hear you 100%. It's that whole smorgasbord, doing all of the things at once. So I think one of those things that is really hard when we're all navigating doing all of the things can be how do I balance my time, right? How do I do all of these things and do my own work and take care of myself and my family and my other obligations that I have. Boundary setting is such a key and important thing. Blocking out time, having planning time, having debrief time. I know it can feel like, oh my gosh, how much more time do I need? But the more intentional that we can be in that and practice in it, the more that we're going to model for other people what that can look like. I understand from campaign life too that campaigns are just its own beast. And sometimes it's like, we just have to get through this cycle, this election, this primary. And so sometimes that's the nature of it. But finding some time to build in to do each of these things when you need to can be really helpful. And I hope that you can do that. And I'm also absolutely happy to chat with you outside of the session if you want to. Yeah. Other questions, thoughts? We have a little bit more time. While we're waiting, this is my contact information. Please do reach out if you have any questions. We're going to put up, you have the worksheet, and I'll put up this PowerPoint as well so you can look through it if you want to. It'll also be on our site. We'll do a little blog post with those things so you can grab it. Yeah, but this has been a lovely workshop. Again, happy to answer any other questions that you have, management challenges, what are scenarios that people have. We're here. We've got quite a few more minutes. I'm curious for folks that are in the room, how many people you manage right now? Are you managing like 1 to 3 people? Are you managing over 5? We had someone in a workshop recently, they were managing like 16 people, and I don't know how they were doing that. Or like, we need to strategize about how you do your one-on-ones so that you can do them, but that's a lot. Yeah, curious for how many folks people are managing, how new you are to management. Pausing for a moment for the chat. There's a weird little lag, so we'll give that a second. Yeah, so a small team, 2 co-directors and 1 organizer at the moment. Based on what we shared, it makes me feel we need to have more one-on-ones. There is a dynamic that absolutely changes between a group and individuals. So I highly recommend, maybe weekly is not quite is a little too much for you, but maybe every other week, maybe even once a month. But having that space for the one-on-ones, I think, can really go far to build trust, to support people. You kind of never know what comes up. We also, some folks that I know will do things like, instead of it being on Zoom, they'll do little walk and talk, just like phone calls with each other, like the same that you would do if you were in person. You can go to a coffee shop, but just, pick up the phone, have a conversation, 30 minutes. You never know, no agenda, just to connect with people who you work with outside of a work context. It can go really, really far. All right. Well, I think we're just going to take another minute, but I would encourage you, here's my email. It's lola@developwell.org, and all of us at Develop Well are happy to chat anytime. I think we'll wrap up here unless there's any other questions. I just want to thank you for joining tonight. This has been so much fun. I love talking about management. I love talking about delegation and feedback. It's literally some of my most fun things. And again, we have 2 workshops coming up. Tomorrow, there's coaching versus problem solving. You can still register if you want. And then in November, we'll be doing a workshop on giving direct feedback. So I'd love to have you there. And yeah, I believe that these trainings will be available on Netroots. I think because you registered and are here tonight, you'll have access to this, and we'll have on the page the worksheet link as well as the PowerPoint PDF so that you can look at that. But if you have any other questions, by all means, please do reach out. Happy to chat. And again, thank you so much for coming tonight. Have a great night or afternoon if you're on the West Coast.